If there ever was a stark manifesto of intent, it came with Svetlana Alexievich's debut novel, War's Unwomanly Face, released in 1985 and set during World War II. The novel ties together a series of moving and often stark monologues on the brutality and hopelessness of war, all told by women and children. Alexievich made no illusions, she was going to toe no one else's line. First-hand account of Soviet Union's disintegration. It's her audacious determination to tell such brutally real stories that had Alexievich on the run for a decade. She was born on May 31, 1948, in the Ukrainian town of Stanislaviv, now the city of Ivano-Frankivsk, in the country's central eastern region, to a Ukrainian mother and Belarusian father. Alexievich would first become a teacher. Both her parents were teachers, then a reporter in the Belarusian town of Nobel, writing about carp fishing and literature through the 1970s. Japan-born British novelist, screenwriter and short story writer Kazuo Ishiguro won the 2017 award. His most renowned novel, The Remains of the Day, 1989, was adapted into a movie starring Anthony Hopkins. His works deal with memory, time and self-delusion. An atypical but world-famous laureate, U.S. songwriter Bob Dylan was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016. The Swedish Academy selected him for having created new poetic expressions within the great American song tradition, calling her work a monument to suffering and courage in our time. The Swedish Academy honored the Belarusian author and investigative journalist in 2015, making her only the 14th woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature since 1901. Alexievich is best known for her emotive first-hand accounts of war and suffering, including War's Unwomanly Face, 1985, and Voices from Chernobyl, 2005. The French writer's stories describe a universe of haunted cities, absentee parents, criminality and lost youths. They are all set in Paris with the shadow of the Second World War looming heavily in the background. The Swedish Academy described the novelist, whose work has often focused on the Nazi occupation of France, as a Marcel Proust of our time. Canadian writer Alice Munro is no stranger to accolades, having received the Man Booker International Prize and the Canadian Governor-General Literary Award 3 times over. The Swedish Academy, which awards the annual Nobel Prize in Literature, called her a master of the contemporary short story. Juan Moy, better known under his pen name Mo Yan, was praised by the Swedish Academy as a writer who with hallucinatory realism merges folk tales, history and the contemporary. The decision was criticized by Chinese dissidents like artist Ai Weiwei, who claimed Yan was too close to the Chinese Communist Party and did not support fellow intellectuals who faced political repression. The Academy chose Tomas Gosta Transformer as the winner in 2011, because, through his condensed, translucent images, he gives us fresh access to reality. In the 1960s, the Swedish poet worked as a psychologist at a center for juvenile offenders. His poetry has been translated into over 60 languages. The Peruvian novelist received the Nobel Prize for his cartography of structures of power and his trenchant images of the individual's resistance, revolt, and defeat. In Latin America, he is famous for uttering the phrase, "Mexico is the perfect dictatorship," on TV in 1990 and for punching his once friend and fellow Nobel laureate, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, in the face in 1976. German-Romanian author was awarded the Nobel Prize as a writer who, with the concentration of poetry and the frankness of prose, depicts the landscape of the dispossessed. She is noted for her work criticizing the repressive communist regime of Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania, which she experienced herself. Muller writes in German and moved to West Berlin in 1987. The Swedish Academy called JMG. Laureate and author of New Departures, Poetic Adventure and Sensual Ecstasy, explorer of a humanity beyond and below the reigning civilization, Laureate was born in Nice, France, in 1940 to a French mother and a Mauritian father. He holds dual citizenship and calls Mauritius his little fatherland. British author Doris May Lessing has written novels, plays and short stories, to name just a few of her mediums. The 93-year-old received the Nobel Prize for being a writer, who with skepticism, fire and visionary power has subjected a divided civilization to scrutiny. She campaigned against nuclear weapons and the apartheid regime in South Africa. Farid Orhan Pamuk, who in the quest for the melancholic soul of his native city has discovered new symbols for the clash and interlacing of cultures, was the first Turkish author to be awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. With more than 11 million books sold, he is Turkey's best-selling writer. Pamuk was born in Istanbul and currently teaches at Columbia University in New York City. Harold Pinter, who in his plays uncovers the precipice under everyday prattle and forces entry into oppression's closed rooms, was awarded the Nobel Prize 3 years before his death from liver cancer. He died on Christmas Eve in 2008. The British playwright directed and acted in many radio and film productions of his own work. In total, he received more than 50 awards. The Nobel Prize was awarded to Elfriede Jelinek for her musical flow of voices and countervoices in novels, and for her plays that reveal society's clichés. A central theme in Jelinek's work is female sexuality. Her novel, The Piano Teacher, was the basis for the 2001 movie of the same name featuring Isabelle Huppert in the lead role. J. Mikotsi, who in innumerable guises portrays the surprising involvement of the outsider, was also awarded the Booker Prize twice before obtaining the Nobel Prize. Cape Town-born author became an Australian citizen in 2006. One of his best-known novels, Disgrace, 1999, is set in post-apartheid South Africa. The Jewish-Hungarian Auschwitz survivor became Nobel laureate for writing that upholds the fragile experience of the individual against the barbaric arbitrariness of history. Kurdish, who died in March 2016, described the atrocities of concentration camps in his books. He worked over 13 years on his semi-autobiographical novel, Hopelessness, which was first published in 1975. V.S. Naipaul received the Nobel Prize in 2001 for his strong storytelling and for having united perceptive narrative and incorruptible scrutiny in works that compel us to see the presence of suppressed histories. Born in Trinidad and Tobago, the British writer has often explored the freedom of the individual in a declining society in his novels. The first Nobel Prize laureate of the new millennium was a Chinese author, playwright and painter based in Paris since 1987. Gao Xingjian was selected for his oeuvre of universal validity, bitter insights and linguistic ingenuity, which has opened new paths for the Chinese novel and drama author, Sabine Peschel, Carla Bleicher, Julian Tomkin. However, as the 1980s arrived, the cracks in the Soviet Union became more evident, fanned by nationalistic dissidents, the disastrous Soviet-Afghan War and the cataclysmic Chernobyl disaster. Suddenly Alexievich found herself center stage, documenting the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and, with it, the only world she knew. Her investigative journalism would eventually earn her the ire of Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a man believed to harbor a fondness for Adolf Hitler, whose brutal crackdown on dissidents saw countless journalists, opposition politicians and activists imprisoned. Alexievich was forced into exile, including for a time in Berlin. At a press conference in October in Minsk, the writer, whose books have been translated into 19 languages, said that the Belarusian authorities simply pretend that she doesn't exist. They don't print my books here. I can't speak anywhere publicly. Belarusian television never invited me, she said. Alexievich said she was at home ironing when she received the news that she was a Nobel laureate in 2015, a message that gave her mixed feelings. On the one hand, it's such a fantastic feeling. But it's also a bit disturbing, she said, adding that it conjured up the names of former Russian winners like Ivan Bunin and Boris Pasternak, who was forbidden by Soviet authorities to collect his prize in 1958. The inspirations of the Nobel Prize winner Alexievich credits Belarusian writer Ales Adomovich for informing her style of narrative realism, what's been called the collective novel, a style which weaves together a number of narratives, often from first-person points of view. She once said, "Reality has always attracted me like a magnet, it tortured and hypnotized me, I wanted to capture it on paper. So I immediately appropriated this genre of actual human voices and confessions, witness evidences and documents." It's her unique voice from behind the former Iron Curtain which has brought her such global renown. Her 1989 book, Zinky Boys, Soviet Voices from the Afghanistan War, documented the largely unspoken reality of the Soviet casualties of that war. Up to 50,000 young men are thought to have lost their lives, plus over 1 million Afghan civilians. Alexievich's unflinching reportage into the roots of this futile war, and the men who came home in zinc-sealed coffins, hence the title, was unwelcome at home, in the dying days of the USSR. She was viewed by many as a traitor. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster was a turning point for Svetlana Alexievich. Alexievich invented new genre, but it was one of the biggest disasters in human history which would seal her fate. Alexievich was working as a journalist in Minsk when, on April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded just over the border with Ukraine. Her reports from eyewitness accounts recorded over 10 years would become the work Voices from Chernobyl, released in 2005, and awarded the National Book Critics Award in the U.S. In 2013 the author was also awarded the Peace Prize of the German book trade, presented at the Frankfurt Book Fair. She has invented a new literary genre. She transcends journalistic formats and has pressed ahead with a genre that others have helped create, said then permanent secretary of the Swedish Academy Sarah Denius. The innovative writer has mapped the soul of the Soviet and post-Soviet people, she added. Alexievich is only one of only 14 women to have ever won the Nobel Prize, including Alice Munro in 2013. Asked back then how she'd use the money, totaling $972,000, 860,000 euros, Alexievich replied, "I do only one thing, I buy freedom for myself." However, the prestigious award led to an exhausting phase in her life. Traveling worldwide and giving several interviews, Alexievich didn't have much time left for her favorite activity, spending time in her dacha in Minsk to write, her agent Galina Derstov told German press agency DPA. According to her agent, the author is now searching for a new tone for her next book, which will also deal with a new topic, love.